access, if insurance started covering and paying out reasonably for case management services, my argument would be that they'd spend a lot less on treatment. That's just not an option right now. And so I think that we're in a time in this industry where there's more access than ever before. But a lot of people don't have the willingness to stay for as long as it takes to actually achieve long-term sobriety.
All right. Well, welcome back, everybody, to another edition of Finding New Waters. My name is B. Reeves. I'm the Director of Business Development here at New Waters. And today we have a very special guest, Alexis Haines with Crisis Case Management. They're all over the country. She's out in Beverly Hills at the moment. So welcome, Alexis.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I'm so glad you're here. And, I'm had the pleasure of meeting you under some bizarre circumstances at a conference recently in Colorado. But, one of the silver linings of that was getting to meet you and having you here as a guest. We had a nice dinner together with you and Michael and Joey. And so crisis case management, I mean, to the outsider, that could sound like a lot of things. What is it?
Yeah, and it's interesting because now I think the Michaels, so we're owned by a bunch of guys named Michael. And I think now in hindsight, they wish that they didn't choose the name Crisis Case Management. But we're known industry-wide and with the families that we work with, predominantly as CCM. Um, and CCM was birthed out of two interventionists. We consider them kind of dinosaurs in our industry. It really started with Mike Appel, who was doing interventions well over 20 years ago. And back in the day, you would call somebody and say, I need help getting my loved one into treatment for substance disorder. Um, or back then it was probably just he's an alcoholic, right? Or a drug addict, and we need help getting our loved one into treatment. And Mike became a very skilled interventionist, but what he found was that a lot of times families would call him back 3 months, 6 months, 9 months post-treatment, and they would say, my loved one's relapsed, we need another intervention. And so I'm going to pause for a second. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
I had to click my clicker to make sure my dogs were okay. Um, so, he would get these calls 3 months, 6 months, and 9 months post-treatment and say, my loved one's relapsed and I need help getting them back into treatment. And so he started basically offering case management before case management was a thing. And what he found was that this was a successful method of helping people stay sober. So, um, out of that, he started to bring in the other Michaels, Michael Walsh and Michael Burba. And he started saying, hey guys, like I need help on my cases. Like I have a huge roster right now and I need some additional support. And so we've grown over the last 15 years. So we're one of the oldest case management companies around. And for a lot of those years, it was just them kind of bootstrapping, which I know from being an owner operator in that first decade of owning and operating a treatment center, right? You're like, this works, this doesn't work. So we're going to change this and we're going to implement this and keep moving. And so when they hired me a couple of years ago, the goal was really to be the best. And so they brought me in to help them organizationally um, within our company to do that, to be the best. Um, and I don't need to go into the details of everything that encompasses that, but I think the things that really set us apart is that we are extremely clinically sophisticated. So we have an incredible um, clinical director. Her name is Valeria Curiel, and she's a licensed social worker. She had many, many years of working in county mental health. So she's really seen it all. She leads our team. Our entire team is in-house, managed by Valeria, and we were able to expand our offerings as a result of bringing her in. So for everyone who's like, okay, this lady's been talking about case management, what the heck actually is this? Everyone knows what an intervention is, right? We've seen the show Intervention. Um, and I'll actually say that I think that that show actually does a lot of disservice to us because people expect this really kind of intense surprise intervention where we're gonna call out this individual and um, get them on board for going into treatment. And while sometimes that is what we do, the vast majority of the time, intervention looks different than what is shown on that television show. There's different styles of intervention, and different methods, everything from an invitational, right? Where we're welcoming you to the table, to the process, to be brought into this experience, to minimize and mitigate the shame factor. There is, of course, the surprise intervention. We also offer family summits. So, oftentimes, it's not just an individual who's suffering, but it's an entire family system that's suffering. And everybody has their flashlight pointed at one person, but really the entire room needs to be illuminated. So bringing in a team with an interventionist and a clinician to host a summit for a family and say, what are we each willing to commit to, right? Are we committed to getting well as a family? And if so, what does that actually look like? What are we willing to do? What are we not willing to do? So that kind of covers intervention. Case management um, is the process of managing a family system's care, right? So it's everything, of course, from the coordination of care. So identifying treatment placement or placement with clinicians that would be appropriate for the individuals involved. It is managing that care, right? Meeting with those clinicians and the clinical team in facilities to make sure that we're on the right path. It is family recovery coaching. It is individual recovery coaching. It is long-term planning, not just in the space of recovery, but really life planning. I think that most people falter because they get out of treatment and they're not um, living a purposeful life. They don't have a direction of where they need to go next. And so it's really, and this word holistic gets thrown around a lot. When I say holistic, I just mean it's all encompassing, right? So it's looking at an individual within a family and the family as a whole and identifying what does each person need in order to be set up for success. Um, so, I also want to say that we're not primary substance. We definitely um, see a lot of mental health. I'd say our caseload is about a 50-50 split. So we deal with a lot of mood, thought, and personality disorder in conjunction with substance or standalone. And then, of course, we have, the calls that are for primary substance with a lower level of acuity of mental health conditions like depression, anxiety, things of that nature.
How does a primary mental health intervention differ from good old fashioned alcoholic addict?
Yeah, it's definitely there are similarities and then there are differences. So the entire process usually starts with the family calling me in crisis, right? Their loved one. Let's just say that somebody has been in an episode of mania. They're highly impulsive. They're making decisions that are not safe for them, impulsive spending, gambling, engaging in risky sexual behaviors, having some delusions. And the family's like, I don't know what's happening to my loved one. Like all of a sudden, my 26, 27-year-old daughter or son is acting in ways that I've never seen before. Um, and so basically it starts with an assessment with me and then an assessment with Valeria. So the after a family decides, yes, I want to sign on for an intervention process, I'll also include that all of our interventions automatically include 30 days of case management. So no longer will we just do your run of the mill, pop in, do an intervention, place them in treatment and leave. Just doesn't work. Um, so Valeria will assess the situation with the family and identify who from our team would be the right fit. Um, and in a circumstance where someone is experiencing an episode of mania or psychosis, for example, um, it really just depends on how acute of the situation. In that circumstance, typically an individual is not going to be willing to receive care. So a lot of the time we start with developing rapport. So we'll put in a primary mental health companion on the individual to start engaging with that person slowly but surely. I'll give you an example of this. We had a male, brilliant kid, graduated from one of the top um, colleges in the country, right? The Stanfords, Harvards, Yales, right? Brilliant kid, graduated with his law degree. And he had one of the most severe cases of bipolar that I've ever seen. And he was in an episode of mania. He was under the care of a psychiatrist. Typically people that fall under, cluster B or bipolars, they hate taking their medication. So
Yeah.
this guy's brilliant, right? He's extremely intelligent. He is self-made. He is funding his own life. He is also in one of the most severe manic episodes that we've ever seen. He's not med compliant. His psychiatrist and the family start working with our team. The family feels completely helpless. Every single call that I get from a family, and we treat hundreds of families a year, right? They say, you'll never get my loved one into treatment, into care. 90% of the time we do. So, um, what ended up happening was he had disappeared for 2 days. We ended up calling in a pet team to go and do a wellness check with the local police department. Um, they would not place him on a hold. It is nearly impossible to get people placed on a hold or even an assessment in this country, which is really such a disservice to people with acute mental health conditions. And the police had reported to our team. Um, that he was mildly psychotic. He thought at the time that he was Batman and that he was here to save the world through a video game that he was going to create. And so we sent in one of our principal interventionists, and the first, he thought that she was Superwoman. And so she played right into that. She's like, "Yep, I'm here, Batman. Like, what's going on?" And she sat with him for about an hour and a half, and she introduced a companion who we called Robin, right? Played right into this type of situation. And we said, Robin's here to provide you with some additional support and some help on your mission. And would you be willing to accept him for some care? And he said, yes. That companion spent 2.5 weeks with that individual on 24/7 support. And by the end of the 2 weeks, we were able to get him to agree to go in for an assessment. And so it really, in a circumstance where it's mental health, a standard intervention, you're talking about an individual with a really fractured nervous system, right? They're very, very fragile in that moment. And going in, quote unquote, guns a-blazing and trying to pull out all of the stops is just never going to work for that individual. So for us, it's really about like working with the families to change the way that they're responding to this individual and to start kind of creating a quote unquote bottom, right? Getting them into the corner where they're so uncomfortable that they have no other option. And then allowing our team to step in as that extra level of support and guidance, gaining their trust, and then guiding them towards treatment. And so, yeah, that it's a very different experience from, um, working with. I'll give you one more example. I had a female who was actually in treatment who had AMA'd 8 times. AMA'd, for anyone who doesn't know, is leaving against medical advice or treatment advice, right? ATAing. So they had left treatment 8 times in a very short window of time. No one was able to get this person contained. And the family called our team. Our team assessed based off of the history that this person um, needed an additional level of support and containment. And so the goal was to build up rapport, enough rapport with this individual for them to agree to come with us to the state of Florida. And once we got them into the state of Florida, we were able to move forward with the Marchman Act, which really is the only state that's doing that level of containment sufficiently. So we had teed up a Marchman Act. We had gone in, built up enough rapport, said, we want you to come with us to Florida just to do an assessment at this other place. You don't have to stop using, right? You absolutely don't. We're going to try to do a quote unquote harm reduction model by having you meet with the specialists. Got them into the state of Florida, moved forward with the Marchman Act. They successfully completed 6 months of treatment and now they're living independently and thriving, right?
That's
So
awesome. And so,
we have to
just so
get
people who don't
creative in
know,
what we do.
the Marchman Act is something unique to Florida, which is a law where an individual can be basically detained and taken to treatment for substance use disorder for up to 90 days. Is that correct?
So it's case by case. So the process is you start with an attorney. The attorney assesses if you'd be appropriate, if the family would be appropriate for a Marchman Act. The individual has to be in the state of Florida before you can move forward with taking that case before a judge. So the attorney will provide testimony to a judge who will then grant a Marchman order. And all a Marchman order really is an assessment, right? You're mandated to go have an assessment. 99% of the time, the assessment is going to conclude that the individual needs treatment. Typically, I believe it's 30 days initially, and it's based off of clinical recommendations. So the facility will work with our team to determine length of stay. So if an individual gets in, and let's just say that they're thriving, they're med compliant, they're going to groups, they're going to individuals, they're participating in a 12-step program or otherwise, great. They'll say 30 days. If they go in and they're med resistant and they're not showing up to groups and they're refusing to do individuals and they're not doing family work, they'll continue to extend the March minute.
Yeah, and thank you for that clarification. And suffice it to say that every state would probably be better off having something similar, right? Because people end up having to, for lack of a better word, trick people into going to Florida so they can get the help they need that they're not quite ready to receive. Is that about accurate?
Yeah, and I would say it's not a tool that we use all the time, right? The vast majority of time, we're able to get somebody into care and staying in care, right? That's the benefit of continuing with case management services is if somebody starts to say that they're going to AMA, we'll be there to re-intervene and go into the treatment center and work with them, figure out what their resistance is, and adjust according to whatever their needs are. There are, however, individuals who are truly incapable of making a safe and sound decision for themselves. And at that point, it is, the family's call whether or not they want to move forward with a stronger measure. I mean, the benefit to this system is that there's no record, right? You're not getting a criminal record for this thing and it keeps people safe. And I agree, it's interesting in our industry. Um, well, backtrack. The beginning of treatment for alcoholics and addicts was mental institutions, insane asylums, and hospitals, right? Just going back less than 100 years ago. And then somewhere down the line, right, was birthed, and you have these major professionals and psychiatrists who are saying, like, maybe we don't know how to treat these people. Like, maybe we really have been doing the wrong thing. And sanitariums and just drying people out and then trying to do some therapy and letting them go is not working. And so you had this huge movement of a 12-step community that was like high levels of accountability and people who really, a lot of them made this their life's work. And then, um, treatment starters like Hazelden and Betty Ford, these like major, you know, cornerstones of hope for people, started developing these treatment centers where people could go for longer lengths of stay. Um, and get some help. But what we saw is that, like, not even that really worked. And then all of the sudden, come the early 2000s, Obamacare passes, people have access to health insurance, and in health insurance now covers treatment. This used to be like all cash pay. And so treatment centers started popping up all over the United States, and we started to see some progress and some movement going forward. Um, but the reality is, like, it's just not enough. There are too many people in this day and age who are dealing with uh, mental health conditions that require long-term stabilization. Um, there are too many people who don't have the means to access that type of quality care, too. Um, and that's the challenge, I think, with working in the field that I'm in right now, coming from owning and operating a facility that offered all levels of care, some insurance based and some cash pay, to working in an industry that is cash pay only. Like, everybody needs case management. We see the proof is in the pudding when you work with a sophisticated team in conjunction with treatment. And when families have a realistic expectation of what treatment is not an end all be all solution for people. Treatment is a period of stabilization and containment that gets people back on their feet, right? But we know based off the statistics that most people, in order to get sober, require multiple stays at different facilities over the course of nearly a decade in order to do that. Well, if people had access, if insurance started covering and paying out reasonably for case management services, my argument would be that they'd spend a lot less on treatment. That's just not an option right now. And so I think that we're in a time in this industry where there's more access than ever before. Um, but a lot of people don't have the willingness to stay for as long as it takes to actually achieve long-term sobriety. And so if you had an additional level of support, like a Marchman or a Baker Act in every state, you would absolutely see better outcomes.
Yeah, I
Oh,
hear you.
I'm so
And
sorry.
yeah, go
I know where I was going with that now.
ahead.
Where I was going with that was was the philosophy within the treatment industry. Like, a lot of places now are patient first reporting. Whatever the patient says goes. And we are doing a disservice to people. That we work with a population of people where the vast majority of the time we're writing a fine line between the fact that they cannot make reasonably good, healthy decisions for themselves, right? And stepping in when an individual is not able to do that, and writing that fine line of, like, are they capable, are they not? And so a lot of the families we work with, we're able to get the individual to make a good decision on their own volition. And that's wonderful. We love that when that happens. And there's a good percentage of those people that have done so much damage or suffer from a mental health condition that in doesn't allow them to come to that conclusion, where stepping in and taking greater action is absolutely required.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that about the patient's always right, basically, or client's always right. And we had a guest on here a little while ago who wrote a book called Dreamland about the opioid epidemic. And I read this book years ago and then happened to meet him. He was on here and we were talking about it on this very podcast about how one of the big contributing factors to the opioid epidemic was adding the one and only subjective vital sign to when somebody goes and sees a provider, they take their temperature, their oxygen, and their blood pressure, and some others that are all objectively measured, but the pain, the pain scale is completely subjective. And so that being able to say, oh, well, I'm in this much pain, there's no way to really measure if that's really true. It's similar, and it sort of all adds to this, the people kind of get in their way, basically, and sometimes people, like you said, are not really in a position to make the best decisions for their own lives at that moment. And sometimes we need the experts and the providers to be able to tell us what to do because we don't know what's good for ourselves at that time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and it's extremely challenging in a broken family system too, where people can't see themselves. They'll have a loved one, right, who they'll call me about in total crisis, saying, "We need your help." And then they'll go against all of our guidance, right, and falter when it comes to actually taking the appropriate action because of their own patterns of behavior that they're so used to engaging in. And so it becomes exponentially more difficult. And I have personal experience with that. My mom wanted me to stay sick, right? So she never had to look at herself. So she did everything that she could in my early recovery to sabotage that process. Um, and so we're dealing with, um, not just an individual who's not able to really make good decisions for themselves, but we're dealing with a lot of the time a family system who is desperate for guidance, but sometimes unwilling to take the necessary action. The same way that the individual who's dealing with a mental health crisis or a substance abuse crisis is desperate to change, but unwilling to do the work,
Yep.
right? And we're so focused, I think, on this industry, um, on treating that individual. And a lot of programs often offer some family work, right? But my my mission, I think, in the work that I do is really focused on the family system. Like these individuals are not going to change unless the entire family system changes, or very rarely, is what I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. And even though there are books and manuals written on this, when it comes to that, once it's, your family, once it's then even though I'm in recovery and work in the field, it still becomes very different when it's actually like right there in front of us. And that's where we need people
Absolutely.
like, CCM to say, look, and draw a hard line. You're too close to the situation. Let us guide you.
Yeah.
And that's a conversation I have on a much smaller scale, pretty much every day with somebody, whether that's in my personal life, involving somebody who needs help, or more often in my professional life. So how did you get into this field? You said you had your own recovery situation, you owned a treatment center, and tell me a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I got sober when I was 19. I just completed my 13th year and turned 14 years old in recovery, which is
Congrats. That's awesome.
wild to say. So, yeah, I was court mandated to treatment in lieu of jail time. I basically burned my entire life down. Um, and I hit a bottom that was, again, it made me desperate, but I wasn't so willing. And thank God for the courts stepping in, and helping me. I still ultimately like had to make the decision, but helping me and guiding me towards recovery. And so I was sentenced to a year in a treatment center. And the first 3 months of that, I was the most disruptive. We call them milieu disruptors in the industry. For people who don't
Yeah.
know, I was extremely disruptive to the entire milieu. So I was very combative in groups. I thought that I knew better than the clinicians. I fought left, right, and center. And then, by the gentle guidance of professionals, I eventually came to terms with who and what I really was, which is a terrible drug addict and alcoholic with severe chronic post-traumatic stress disorder. And I said, all right, fine, maybe I need some help. And for the next 9 months, I accepted their help, and I went and did, um, work with the clinicians there, and got involved in a recovery community. And I started actually going back to school, to become a chemical dependency counselor. And I really started to learn about like what alcoholism and addiction was through like a clinical lens, as I was also learning from, the big books about what this thing was. And I was taking in a lot of information and applying it, and working both on myself and working towards, a career of working in this field. And shortly after my schooling, I was helping to open a few programs and I was running groups and I was involved in a lot of clinical and at the same time, my ex-husband was starting a 8-bed sober living in Malibu. And um, I just continued to grow in this field, and eventually that sober living turned into a residential facility and a detox, and we opened a PHP and an IOP and then multiple locations, and we continued to grow it. And then post my divorce, I started to work as a consultant for industry professionals and kind of just being a listening ear and a kind of visionary for a potential future for them. And then, um, I was wanting to take a step away from working heavy in clinical, and I wanted to move over into marketing and sales. And, you know, God, universe, whatever you want to call it, guides us in really interesting ways. And I was put in contact with the mics over here at DCM, and they said, we have a vision and we need somebody to help us with that vision and to help us implement it. We want to be the best in the business and we want your help in really solidifying the incredible work that we've already been doing. And can you help us in that? And I said, well, certainly. And so the first year at CCM was really about like stabilization and growth. And then for the last year, so year two of working with them, I've just moved into business development and admissions. And it's funny because I said, oh, I want to move out of clinical, but I just basically sidestepped because every family comes to me in a crisis, and I spend probably the vast majority of my time providing them with coaching and support and a listening ear more so than I'm selling anything else. As you know,
Yeah.
somebody who's like
Yeah.
on the phone with these families. Um, and it's just such an honor and a privilege to be able to do that. I love it. I really
Yeah.
do.
Me too. And when I get to tell a mom, I've been your son, my mom's been you, and
Mhm.
it goes such a long way because people, kind of back to what I was saying earlier, even though we can read all the stats, see the news about fentanyl and, yes, alcohol, still king alcohol, but have all this information. But yet when it becomes personal, it's still just, it seems so lonely. And then even if you have a friend or a neighbor who's been through this, it still is like, that 500-pound phone, it's hard enough to reach out to people in recovery once we get sober, but like those first calls when people are in crisis is even harder for a lot of people because there's just so much shame attached to it, which is, of course,
Yeah.
a fallacy. It's not, it shouldn't be there, but it is.
Yeah, and I'm always here too to just be like a listening ear and to provide treatment recommendations as well, because I think that like, having the appropriate placement, people will call a hotline or call a facility or call who their sister told them that their sister went to this facility. And finding that appropriate fit, I think, is so important. Making sure that you're finding a facility that is clinically sophisticated enough to deal with your loved one's exact needs, right? Finding a facility that has the appropriate milieu, that is within your budget or accepts your insurance, that has the like level of care that you're going to need moving forward, or that you have the guidance to get there. I think all of that is just so important. I think the days of, I mean, there's so many amazing options out there now when it comes to treatment, and I think that finding that appropriate fit can save you a few extra times of going back and forth between leaving treatment and back in treatment.
That's such a great point. And I've had a few situations lately where somebody, you know, puts me in touch with somebody who, decided to get some help. But before they did, they made some calls. They did some of their own research, and unfortunately, if they hadn't talked to me, they may have gone to a place that was probably not suited for them. But it was the first thing that popped up, that kind of thing. And so, yeah, I would recommend calling Alexis and CCM to figure out, what is the exact right fit for my loved one, because like we just said, it's easy to get lost in the shuffle, and there's so many great programs who sometimes unfortunately get kind of overshadowed by ones that are willing to spend more money on the SEO optimization. Um,
Yeah. That's like a huge issue in our industry too, right? It's just like some of these companies are willing to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars to be the top. And it's not always the right fit. And you're dealing with salespeople, and I love us salespeople. But I want it to be ethical, right? And guess what? I refer out, right? It's like, yes, I want to be able to support every family, but I know, right, that if a case comes my way that is really not the right fit, I'm going to send it out to another case management company, right? Like if we
yeah,
are not the right fit, we're going to refer that case out. Um,
same. We help everybody who calls. We can't take everybody who calls, but we help everybody who calls.
yes, absolutely.
I wanted to touch on something you said when you were talking about your own recovery journey, and you got that nudge from a judge instead of going to jail, went to treatment for a year and hemmed and hawed and bucked for 3 months, and then you finally decided to accept the help. And that's something that we talk about people, wanting it, needing it, and even asking for help, which is so hard. Get to that gift of desperation, which is what it took for me. And then, even though it wasn't my idea, in your case, it really wasn't necessarily yours either. But eventually, in your case, 3 months later, and for me, it was a few days in, but I was willing to accept the help. And that's what sometimes I think gets lost in the shuffle is people, saying that because the hardest words anyone can utter are, I need help, which is true, but then we got to accept it. And by accepting it means doing this work and taking these suggestions from people who know better than we do at that particular time in our lives. And that's what, it's that accepting help is an action.
Yeah. And that's not just for the individual, it's for the whole family. My heart
Yes.
broke earlier today. I had a call with a mom that I've been touching base with. Her daughter is, got polysubstance use and borderline personality disorder. And I had been trying that, the clinical was recommending our support. And the mom, dad are so enmeshed in the borderline chaos, right? They're stuck in that trap, in that system of her really running the show. Um, and they need some additional support. And, weeks and weeks ago, I had said, well, why don't we get you involved with one of our coaches right now? You guys, if you don't want to do full-blown case management, let's just do some hourly family recovery coaching, provide you guys with some guidance and some support. And they just kind of sat on it, even though the clinical team was recommending it. I called mom today and she goes, I'm just exhausted. She AMA'd from treatment again. She's flying back home. And and she declined our services. And that's a family that I know we can help, right? That's a family who I
Yeah.
know needs our help. And that mom said no, right? She's not ready for that next step. And that's okay, right? Um, but nothing changes if nothing changes. And so, and I'm not here to provide um any level. I say all of this with like love because I'm so impacted when I'm like, I know you need help. I'm here to give you this help, and they don't want the help. It's like
Yeah.
that's as heartbreaking as an alcoholic who needs the help, and I want to help them, but they're not ready for the help, you know?
Yeah.
And so this is often very rewarding work and can be equally heartbreaking at the same time.
I completely agree. Well, y'all do great work, and I've met all the mics individually, and they all do great work. And one thing I was gonna say is something I know y'all do, which sometimes the best interventions are the ones that would you get all the pieces and all the players in place, and then the person just goes without having to have any kind of surprise or invitation. It just kind of
Mhm.
happens, and I know that happens with the work y'all do leading up to an intervention. Um,
Right.
well, I just want to say thank you so much for coming today. How do our listeners and viewers find you and CCM?
Yeah. So you can visit our website. It's crisiscm.com. On there is a contact form for me. It has our 800 number that goes directly to my cell phone. And yeah, I'm always here to just lend an ear to support people who need some resources or who are seeking family recovery support or intervention or case management services as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, Alexis Haines, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. If you liked what you heard today or just want to know more, give us a call on 919-670-8119 or visit us at newwatersrecovery.com. Thank you.